I'm National Master Bryan Tillis, and welcome to a brand new series simply entitled Tillis Mistakes. Now, in this series, we're going to be going through games that I personally played, wins and losses, that, sometimes it's a story of how I learned something, and sometimes it's a story of redemption. And either way, I've had a lot of experience over the years teaching at camps and teaching individual students, small groups, etc. And the lessons that they got the most out of were my personal games, the annotations of my personal feelings at certain moments, and the lessons that I take away now as a master reflecting back on those games. So I really hope that you'll get as much as I did out of these games. I was once told the difference between a wise man and a fool is a fool must learn from their own mistakes, and a wise man learns from others' mistakes. So let's get into this content, and we're going to kick things off with a game played by my students' standards. I mean, I've got a chess clock that I use that's older than my current 8th graders. It was played in the way back in 2004. I had only been playing chess. My first tournament was February of 2003, and this was in September 2004. So, not a ton of experience by this time period. My rating had made it up to 1633, and I'm playing white in this game. And the theme of this game overall is psychology of competition. Mistakes or judgment calls made off the board that affects your on the board decisions. And I'm playing in the Atlanta Chess Center at the time. I had a number of chess friends growing up that played there for decades, and they referred to it as the House of Pain because you're going on a curvy street to get to this thing, and it seems like at any point in time a car could veer off and hit the building. So there's just a sense of danger just being in the building. And as you walk in, it's a small 2-story building, and I'm like, where's the chess being played? And you see like a narrow staircase, and as you walk up this extremely narrow staircase, all the boards are set up upstairs, and it had that feel of a really old school like Russian chess center type situation. And I'll never forget the image of the Atlanta Chess Center, and it was intimidating. I'd never been anywhere like that. I mean, growing up in Alabama and playing tournaments, it was always like playing at Auburn University in Montgomery. We had a lot of tournaments there, and then free sites, gyms, churches, places like that. So when you go to the House of Pain, it's completely different. And they put up round 1 pairings, and I make my way over to the sheet, and by my rating, I feel like, okay, there's, 60 players playing. I should be probably at the lower end because I'm at the break. I understood a little bit how pairings work. I'm searching, and I don't see my name anywhere. And I'm like, oh, did they mess up? And I keep going up the list, and to my horror, I'm on board 1. In round 1, board 1, and I'm playing against longtime master Klaus Pohl, a very strong national master who currently resides in South Carolina and is perennially one of the top players of that state. And Klaus is a long-standing personality in chess, and he's a great guy. Years later, after this game was played, I was working on my master's in sociology, and I was taking a gerontology course, and the professor gave us an assignment to interview interesting player or interesting person in a field. And Klaus was the first person I thought of, and he gave an amazing interview, and I got an A on that project. So uh, he's got a rich and interesting life. Very much respect, and at his current age, he is still actively competing, and he keeps himself in shape every day, which I highly advocate for. So we have a bit of an aside starting this up, but at the time, I was playing 1d4, and Klaus played d6. And already, this is a flexible move. At the time, and as we'll see in the next few lessons, I really didn't have a good grasp of opening theory. I was talented tactically and creative, and that's a great start for most chess players if you have that. But I didn't have the knowledge yet. I remember in this time period, I just gotten like notation down, basically, and some people are like, you're 1600 and barely had notation down. Slow clap. But honestly, I would have a strong chess player speak a line to me, and I would struggle to try to translate in my head the notation. So don't worry too much about deeply understanding notation when you're developing, because it just clicks all of a sudden one day. I mean, how does a person learn to read, for instance? You have to practice it. So after d6, I'm like, okay, probably angling for a King's Indian. I was at least aware of that. So I played c4, natural enough move, and e5. And we have our first moment, a big psychology of competition moment. I'd never seen this position before. I remember feeling like, okay, I stopped and had to think here, and I go, all right, I'm 1600 playing against a master. This is the first time I've ever faced a master over the board. There is an intimidation factor. This is the first time I've ever been on board one in a big tournament. And I have the choice to trade queens here with DE, queen takes D, or do something else like knight f3 and maintain the tension. What would you do and why? So it's a good time to pause the video and reflect. All right, hopefully you gave a pause and gave some thought about what you would do in this position with white. And I believe that this is not a question of technique, but a question of what is best in the position here. And as a master now, and I've played this with black. In fact, the lesson that I learned from this game with the trading queens is how easy it is for black's position to be played. And my very first win against a grandmaster was playing this position with black, and the queens were traded early. So, lessons learned. They say you have to beat a master 3 times. Opening, middle game, and end game. We're skipping straight to an ending. The ending is the most technical phase of the game, and that's where a master is going to be strongest. As a young player that's up and coming, that was strong in calculation and was a hard worker over the board, it would be much better for me to keep tension with knight f3. Of course, that's not what I did in the game, but here's a brief little overview of how the lines, say, could have went if I knew what I was doing in opening theory. So we've got a few different lines, and e4 is one, knight g5, and we get this type of position, g3, and we fight for the center with f3. So that's one way this could go. Then another option is e takes d4, and we end up with this like Maroczy bind type situation, which white just carries some edge. It's hard for black to do any sort of meaningful breakthrough with his pawn structure, and we could just kind of put pressure on the d file and chill. And then lastly, knight d7 is the main line and the old school way of playing, the old Indian, and there's multiple ways to play it. I mean, we could just put bishop e2 and the pawn would be on g2 and castle with that classical King's Indian setup. I've always been partial to fianchettos personally, so that's why I would recommend this. And this type of structure definitely would have been more complicated and the way to go. But my thoughts at the time was like, oh, okay, well, I can just trade queens and I'm okay against the master. And it should be noted when you look in the database, black already scores upwards of 65% win. And I mean, you turn on the engine's just like shoulder shrug, but it's very, very easy to play and gives a lot of technical choices for white. So my opponent made an excellent decision with his opening choice here because he doesn't have to use a lot of energy to beat me. Excellent technique. Knight c3, just getting development. Giving a tickle to the c-pawn, need to do something about that. Now, how would you handle defending the c-pawn? The difference in levels of mastery in chess, or strength in chess in general, is being able to look at a problem and finding multiple ways to solve the problem and finding the solution to the problem which poses the most practical problems for our opponent in the future for them to go wrong. Now, here, it's easy to identify the problem. Our pawn is being attacked. How should we defend it? Well, in the game, I played e4, and structurally I don't think this is necessary, and it makes a gap on the d4 square that a knight could very well hop into this with good effect at some point, and I'm not entirely satisfied with e4. Now, if you said b3, you definitely did better than I did in the main game, where we just get this solid position, and one of the keys is being able to trade good pieces for bad pieces, and that bishop on e6 is very nice. Well, we have this bishop h3 idea, and after king c7, black is castling by hand. We can meet him there, and f3 secures key squares, preventing this knight from getting really useful. We can follow up with e4, and we have a dynamically equal position with room to play. This would have been much better than what I played in the main game, much more flexible. But in the main game, I played e4, c6, and black is going through the motions. And here, it would have been much better to castle's queenside. And after king c7, I really like this move, bishop e2, because it's easy to miss a nice little tactical shot here. Like if black wastes time to some degree, I mean, a move like rook d8, knight d5 could be interesting as takes. Where's the bishop going? And we're getting the bishop pair. So it's these types of ideas which can really throw your opponent off balance. And this is what you're looking for when you're playing an opponent who really loves a structural orientation. Like the guy who plays the Philidor or the Old Indian every time he sits down with white or black. He wants his structure. All he wants is his plan so he can play fast moves in automatic chess without really thinking in the opening. Same thing for, say, a London system guy. They just want the same structure every time. So if you can throw them off or change the structure while keeping complications, that's typically going to be the way to go because you are forcing them to think from an early phase of the game and issue against them. And especially if you're the higher rated player, you already have an advantage. More room to go wrong, they'll do poorly. Well, I decided to play knight f3 instead, and I think this is another inflexible move because putting the knight in front of the f-pawn, I'm going to need to move the knight again. Moving the f-pawn one way or another, f3 or f4, is impossible now. And that's, I don't really think, the best square for the knight. And I mean, notice in the b3 line that was recommended that With the knight on g1, we have this idea to play bishop h3 and get rid of this bishop. Because notice how this bishop is just kind of hemmed in as a purely defensive piece, while this is a purely offensive piece. You want to trade your bad ones for the good ones. Pretty simple, straightforward. Now, f6, and this is the optimal structure for black. If you're interested in playing these old Indian structures, that's all you need to know. Get the pawn on f6, pawn on c6, castle by hand, and then just improve your position. So this is a game in 45 tournament, and my opponent is just not using any time, really. He's able to play blitz chess with this while I'm having to think because I've never seen it before. Again, excellent practical decision. Learn from your elders and masters because they typically know what they're doing. Well, I didn't see any other place to put the b, so I put him there, and then I castled. And though I'm developed, I just don't have any flexibility, and there's not really a clear plan yet. Knight b6 bothers the b pawn. Okay. And I remember having a brief discussion with him after the game, and he said he really didn't like bishop a3 check. It was just kind of a knee-jerk reaction. I mean, all it really does is get my king closer to the action and improve the structure. I think it would have been better for black to go with g6 and then this bishop h6 idea. So bishop a3, king c2, and he goes right back. And here is a critical moment. You need to try to come up with a plan for white. And this is normally where I find when I'm doing lessons with my students that they falter because it's easy to develop. Well, you just get your pieces out and use them. That's phase one. Well, we're in the middle game now. And we need a plan to try to shake things up. Because chess is just like boxing. In the sense that if you only play defense, if you're only shuffling around, you're going to lose. You need to attack in order to win. Now, this is a good place to pause and try to find a plan in this position to move forward. Okay, hopefully you tried to pause. And the plan in the position may not come to you immediately, and that's completely fine. So I believe the most flexible move in the position is knight e1, and it's definitely stronger than what I played in the main game continuation, because this knight has the potential to come to d3, and then we're looking, once the knight is there, where we have expansion on f4 at a certain point. Maybe g3, f4, but f4 at a certain point would be strong. Also with the knight on d3, we're covering b4, we're covering c5. We could potentially hop into c5, as well as doubling rooks, because everything's out of the way and it's clean development. So this knight e1, knight d3 maneuver, I feel, is best in the position. And at the time, I don't think I ever would have considered an undevelopment move. I was always looking to go forward. You know, when you're young and pretentious, that's what you're going to do. You're looking to attack. But I remember specifically about a year after this, I was playing a game that was similar in structure to this, and I made an undevelopment move and said to myself, thank you, Karpov, because I had had a deep study of Karpov's games and noticed he never hesitates to go backwards in order to have full harmony in his position a few moves later. And a big lesson can be taken from that as well. Don't be afraid to shuffle in order to attack in the most optimal way, especially in a positional game like this. I play knight h4 in the main game, and I'm looking to eye those key squares. Maybe I can get to f5. And it's a reasonable move. It does something. But now, I mean, I would probably play knight e1 personally if I was playing the game. g6 was played. Makes a lot of sense. And though the computer doesn't hate this move, I would not consider it. It would not be my first choice at all. F4. I'm just like, oh, okay. I just want my bishop on F4. I don't care about isolated pawns. I don't care about structures. If I'm going to play F4, I'm going to go like G3, F4 to make sure I have the duo in the center now. I couldn't play that move with a straight face today, I don't think. Yeah, I know. I couldn't do it. My opponent just sits tight, and I don't give an opportunity here to have my pawn structure ruined anymore with captures, and I don't want his knight to be very strong on e5, so I go f5, and now h3 is okay, but I'm starting on the path of the wrong plan, and I really should be considering just solidifying the position a bit and seeing what black has in store. I think that is one of the great things in retrospect. Like when I play against a player that's 1600 to say 2000 now, most of the time I get a position like this with black and I'm okay with being slightly worse and just waiting around because I know my opponent's going to get impulsive and do something that's going to ruin their position. So sometimes it's a development in a feel to just know when your opponent's going to go wrong, and you just play solid moves and wait. Waiting is not a crime in chess because your opponents will often surprise you with absolutely terrible moves. After h3, g5 is played. I'm like, okay, well, the knight's coming back. b6, just overprotecting the c5 square, getting that under control. And I go, okay, well, he wants to put a piece there, so I'm going to try to stop that. I'm playing reactionary chess. It's not the worst thing in the world. h5, and right here, this is the key moment to where I transition from, I had this aggressive idea with knight h4 on move 13 to playing pure defense. And you can't play pure defense in chess. I mean, what's the worst thing that's going to happen here? He's going to play g4. Okay, well, I could just put my knight back on h4. If he takes, I take with the rook, and now I could double up rooks and put pressure on the isolated h-pawn. I'm not quite sure what I was so afraid of here. It's just, oh, a master is attacking me. You see ghost when you're playing against players that you're intimidated by. That's why it's important to work on not being intimidated. The more experience you get, the less intimidated you are. I know very much that when playing against strong players or players that you recognize that have a name in the chess world, like a strong grandmaster who's done so much, it could be easy to get intimidated, and I was at first, but it was lovely being able to play in the Pro Chess League for a few years, and I got to play against many players in the top 50 in the world, including Caruana and So. And once I saw that if I can get a type of position that I understand, I can hang with anybody in the world, that took the intimidation factor away. But you have to have a game plan, and you have to know exactly what you must do to get your chances in that type of game. So keep that in mind. A puncher always has a chance, and you have to have the right mindset in order to compete with a much, much higher rated opponent. Knight h2 is just poo-poo. Much better would be a move like rook d3, a nice waiting move saying, all right, I'm going to double up. If you want to do something over here with g4, you can try it. It's not good. You got your space, but you can't do anything with it, boss. Knight h2, though, it just puts a knight on a bad square, and now it gets worse. Again, g4 is not really a threat, but g4 myself, I've created a terrible defensive dynamic. At any point in time, black will have the ability to capture here, but if I capture him, it doesn't help. I'm still going to have an isolated pawn in the long term, and it's easy and has a straightforward plan for black to just double rooks on the h-file and invade. So This is just a positional blunder and should technically lose the game. My opponent decides to grab, and I take with a knight to isolate my pawn. I'm happy with taking here, and I'm like, okay, let's make a pawn with a funny hat. Like, this is one of the worst bishops I have ever seen. He does the job of a pawn, at best. And this is already a technically losing position. And I remember feeling that something had gone wrong around here, but I'm like, how is he going to win? And I just remember already like resigning in my mind. I mean, I was 16 at the time and definitely didn't have the experience I have now at twice the age. So, an interesting moment. He goes rook a8. Like, okay, you have plenty of squares to put the rook. Why put the rook on g1? Why not e1? Anything. But rook hg1, pure defense again. a6, a good practical move. And I see that b5 is coming, so I move my knight. I don't want my pawn isolated, so I take. I go, okay, I'm starting to see the light of day. I go rook d3 and bishop c5. This is a good moment to pause, and let's talk about our theme again. Psychology of competition. I'd been playing defensive moves, and I had a specific idea to just kind of bail out, trade down, stay solid. If you play like a rock and just play defense, you're not going to get anywhere. And it's like the concept of playing for a draw. There's no such thing in chess. I hate when anyone brings up even the idea of it. You are always playing for a win. Because if your psychology is anything other than I'm playing to win, why play the game? It is a game. We're always playing to win. Even if your position is busted, you are playing to win. Because there are endgames that looks like you should never be able to win. King and knight versus king and pawn, and your opponent self-mates themselves because it's a rook pawn. If you're looking for every opportunity to win always, you're going to have more opportunities to win a game than if you're just looking to trade down and play passively like I did here. And that is a huge takeaway because at this moment, hopefully you paused and found a good move here. So, moving on, I played bishop takes c5. But at the time, I had a big tactic that was missed. Rook takes d7, the 2-for-1 special. And just to give you an example line here, this is completely winning for white. Bishop h5, he's trying to get in, check, check. I go after the base pawn. b4, sealing in the king. Threatening bishop c5 and rook a7 mate, so rook h7. And after takes, it's pretty clear that I'm going to be able to move my bishop, take the e-pawn, move the bishop again. I can always sack for that g-pawn if it gets a little froggy. And the f-pawn's going to go. A new lady's going to emerge, and white has a pretty trivial win. Psychology of competition, folks. If you believe you're going to lose, you're going to lose. If you're playing for a draw, you're playing for two results. You're either going to get your draw or you're going to lose. Self-fulfilling prophecy. It's an important thing in psychology. It definitely applies in chess. It is not a team sport, and you need to have your mind right to compete at the highest level. So, after bishop takes c5, this was my only opportunity I had to have a real advantage in the entire game. And I wouldn't deserve to win the game, in my opinion, even if I found rook takes d7. because of the mediocre effort. And that's one of those definitional things in my mind. What's the difference between winning and beating somebody? When you beat somebody, you outplayed them. You outclassed them in a certain way, and you won the game. But when you just won, just simply put, your opponent blundered. And I mean, anybody can get lucky with, like in boxing. You know, your opponent has a fleeting thought for just a moment and gets knocked out. I don't feel the same about a game where I got lucky as opposed to when I outplayed an opponent. And it definitely would have been luck. Rook e3, and pretty much all of my pieces are passively placed. And he transitions. Great technique at this point. Rook a8, hitting the pawn. And I remember being in time trouble at this point as well. Hitting the knight. So defending while completing this plan. And I'm just trying to get pieces active. But I love this move. Knight a4. Can't take because of the rook on e3. So just trying to get out of this mess. Bishop h5. Trying to seal in the king. And there goes a pawn. Bishop d1. And I'm just valiantly trying to hold on here, but nothing doing as knight d1 drops the rook and ends the game. So hopefully you enjoyed the first part of this series, and we'll have many parts to come focusing on my mistakes and the lessons from specific games. So until next time.